up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under. We are reviewing the Steelers' 7th round draft picks. Didn't get to do these guys this morning in between the 5th, the 6th, and the UDFAs. I know there's a bit of a gap between, but I had to catch some sleep somewhere over here in Australia. So now we're doing the 7th round draft picks in, or the 6th and the 7th, I should say, in Donte, 7th, I like, pick 226 and pick 229, Donte Kent, and also Carson Bruener as well. Two really good picks there for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 7th round. Carson Bruener, obviously the son of Mark Bruener, the tight end for the Steelers back in the day, 30 years ago, and then before my time. Well, actually, no, about when I was a kid. And then Donte Kent as well, the cornerback that they got out of Central Michigan. So we're going to get into those blokes on this show. We're going to have a look into them. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it because these guys it was kind of fun to kind of do these guys actually. So we're going to kick off with this bloke. We're going to pick off with a guy that was picked first. And that is the Central Michigan cornerback, Donte Kent. He's the bloke in the maroon helmet on the screen in front of you. So kind of interesting with Donte Kent. He had a grade overall on NFL.com of 5.91, which made him an average backup or special teamer. So that's kind of interesting in that, like, you would have thought a guy that began picked like that late against other people that were available on the board, perhaps, it would be a lower grade than that. So that I think the Steelers did really well to get a guy like this. He's also a guy that played, they had him projected as around 7 with Lance Zierlein. He was a 4-year starter. He had 47 career passes defensed, impressive athletic testing at Pro Day. He can make up for lost ground really quickly, especially on deep routes. He's got good burst. He's got the right amount of toughness as well for run support. He was also a returner and a punt returner, so it shows a bit of toughness there, and he's fast. He's also been, they reckon he could be capable of being a gunner. So he's going to be a special teams ace and try and make his way onto the roster that way, as well as being a really good corner. Kind of weaknesses in his game are that he only had like 2 interceptions. He's a bit upright. Sometimes he shows lack of instincts. His route recognition could be considered below average according to some scouts, and he can be inefficient in coverage moments. But what I found was interesting with him is that, and it was noted in the press conferences, particularly the one with Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan, is that he played inside and out. So, as I said, he was played over 5 years in Central Michigan for 3,198 snaps, so just below 3,200 snaps. Over a quarter of those were actually in the slot, and then 2,000 of those were in a traditional corner position. So he can play inside and out. Now, with his height being a smaller bloke, because I think he's 5'10", and some people said he's more like a 5'9", and 190 pounds. He probably projects a bit more as a slot receiver, slot corner, but can play a bit outside as well. Kind of like a Beanie Bishop situation, but I like that you've got the versatility of both blokes. And remember, like, this guy technically has been drafted higher than Beanie Bishop. Now, Beanie Bishop could have been drafted in the 4th round last year. Beanie Bishop had a good year. But to have like 2 blokes like that that can play inside and out is a really good thing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's really good for the versatility, particularly if this guy can make the roster. Now, as I mentioned, he only had 2 interceptions in college, so that kind of hurts him down a little bit in terms of some people on their boards. He had 6 tackles for a loss according to Sports Reference, which is interesting, I think. He had 46 pass defenses according to Sports Reference, whereas PFF had the 47. He had 2 forced fumbles as well, according to Sports Reference, which is kind of interesting, I think, because we don't see that a lot from a lot of corners that the Steelers aren't getting in the late rounds, this forced fumble situation. I think they have 1 forced fumble for him on Pro Football Focus or PFF. According to PFF, he's only led in 13 TDs in his career. And he had 5, and of the pass defenses that he had, Pro Football Reference has 35 for him, whereas Sports Reference has 46. But if you look at the 5 that he had last year amongst all corners, I basically did a filter. If you look at it, I did a filter of all the corners that played college football last year and that were eligible for this year's draft, and then I cut out if you had only played 50% of the top number of snaps at corner, which was 541 snaps. So if you played 270 snaps or less, you didn't make the cut. When I did that, and I looked at the 5 PBUs, right? I looked at the 5 PBUs that he had. He actually was a top 40 cornerback in this draft, which sounds kind of like, yeah, whatever. Top 80 cornerback in this draft, which sounds whatever, but it's actually pretty decent for a 7th round guy. Remember, not every person you can be eligible, not every person's gonna be able to come out, right? So, like, I thought he'd be like a bit lower on that list as well. So I was kind of something that I was pretty happy to see. One thing though that I think he'll need to work on is he did allow quite a number of yards early on in his career, but he brought that way down in the last year. Brought that way down to like 393 yards in this past season that's been. So again, that puts him in the top 100 of cornerbacks eligible in this draft, which is pretty good. It's not too bad. And so I like what we're going to get out of Donte Kent. Definitely a 7th rounder by no stretch of the imagination. Like, this isn't a guy that should have been drafted in the 3rd round. He is a late round guy that's going to have to learn, right? That's not remotely up for debate. But one thing I did also like from him was that he was 43rd when you went through it, and there's a lot of guys at the same rankings. Like, there's like 6 guys at 35 with PFF, but he was 43rd in yards per reception allowed with 10.6. So again, top 50 cornerback eligible for this draft, and you get him in there late. You get him there as someone that can do special teams. You get a guy that can play inside out that's very experienced. That's a good thing. Like, I think that you can't really complain about that. Could he have gone undrafted, and were there other guys at other positions on the board that I would have preferred the Steelers to get? Actually, technically, yes. But he's the pick. He's versatile. He fills a need. And a 7th round is someone that basically, the guys on Steel Curtain Network say this all the time, and I do agree with it, particularly, is that the 7th round guys are guys that you do not want someone else to go grab undrafted. I think some guys you can just basically get as a steal, but this is a guy you didn't want to have to compete with in the UDFA signings. So I'm happy with it. I do like it, particularly with the special teams value. I do think Beanie Bishop, though, they're projected with higher upside than Donte Kent. Not to rubbish the pick by any stretch of the imagination. Let's move on to Carson Bruener, who's making a big tackle on the screen in front of you right now. So Carson Bruener, again, really interesting pick. And I should say with Donte Kent and Carson Bruener, neither bloke was on Daniel Jeremiah's top 150. Neither bloke was on the PFF big board. Neither bloke was on the PFN big board. So these guys are definitely rougher prospects. But they could be a diamond in the rough when we think about that as well. When we look at Carson Bruener, look, obviously there's the family pedigree. His dad was the scout for his area, which is kind of cool. I don't see nepotism. I actually think with the Steelers, if your dad's picking you, it's going to make life tougher. You're going to have been through the ringer. Carson Bruener is Daniel Jeremiah described him as reckless. If you want to know where the ball is, you find him. He looks great on tape. A little bit on the small side. He could easily add 5 to 8 pounds. I wouldn't want him to add too much more because I wouldn't want him to slow down. That would be my fear if you bulk him up too much. And the Steelers could use a more agile linebacker. I don't hate that. So I think from that perspective, like a 40-yard dash of 4.58 for a linebacker is pretty good. 10-yard split of 1.57 is pretty quick. He had a good vertical, a good broad overall. He got an athleticism score of 77 by Next Gen Stats, which is pretty good. Had a combine, which was 11th for all the combine guys that were at the linebacker position. So definitely someone that's not too shabby. Particularly when you're getting him late in the draft in round 7, pick number 10, right? That's pretty decent. If you look at the overall, so I ran the same thing, I'll dive more into his stats, but I did the same thing as I did with corner. I basically I went through the FBS, this time just only FBS, sorted it for draft eligible in 2025. Then I did 50% of the snaps of 944, so someone had to have played over 470 snaps. And I sorted that to see where Carson Bruener came into the mix, because you don't want to skew it with guys that haven't played that much. Now, he didn't have a sack, which is like, not having a sack is not having a sack. You're not on the list, particularly when there's guys that have had 8 sacks at the linebacker position. Now, PFF do only split edge and linebacker. So you don't get outside linebacker and linebacker. So some of the guys at linebacker are 3-4 outside linebackers because they separate edge away. So it depends on how the player is designated. So you got to take that into account. This isn't just raw inside linebacker. So that's one thing. That's one thing to remember when I tell you these lists. But if you look at quarterback hits, right, not necessarily sacks, but still getting to the quarterback, right? Look at hits. He had 7. That makes him equal 8th last year in all draft eligible college football blokes in terms of the linebacker position. That is pretty good, right? That is pretty darn good. When I looked at his defensive grade overall, and this gives you a sort of an insight, he was number 17 with a PFF grade of 80.9. Now, I know a lot of people don't like PFF grades, but as I always say, particularly with college guys, PFF has a lot more stats, and at least if you look at the grade and you compare it to other blokes, you can take some sort of insight out of it. Kobe King, who was on my list, who had already been picked, was number 8 out of Penn State, 83.6, just for clarification. Jay Higgins had already been picked, I think, as well, was an 87. But Jihad Campbell, who went in the first round, was an 81.6. Carson Schwessinger, who the Browns picked at the first pick of the second round, he had an 80.6. Carson Bruener had an 80.9, just behind Jihad Campbell, ahead of Carson Schwessinger, right? So this is a bloke that, that's his defensive grade overall. When you look at his tackle grade as well, he had a good tackle grade. I was pretty happy with where he sat there on tackle grade at 76. That can fluctuate. Now, a lot of that's due to his missed tackles. He did have 10.2% missed tackles. That's not so great when you compare it with some of the better players. So the missed tackle rate for him will be an area for him to work on in the NFL. Likewise, getting the odd sack would probably help him too, all things being said. You look at the reception percentage that he allowed, though, not too bad there. He was equal 35th, which is, again, I don't hate it. Remember, this is draft eligible. Not every guy comes out. He played for Washington too. He's playing good competition, right? And it's also different when you look at the number of targets the bloke had, because the bloke he was equal 24th in the league. Yeah, equal 37th in the league, but if he'd had 2 more, it would have been top 25 for the number of targets thrown his way. So it wasn't like, some of the guys that have this low reception rate had 12 targets thrown their way, right? Like Cohen Atola out of Old Dominion. So you gotta factor some of these stats into account. But as I was saying, like a top 50 linebacker overall in a lot of stats, but also like a guy that was sort of competed with some of the top linebackers that were picked in this year's draft. And the other thing, like Donte Kent, is this bloke offers a lot of special teams opportunity as well. And that was quoted by both linebacker coach and Danny Smith as well. I said Danny Ainge, basketball. But Danny Smith, special teams coach, love the look of him, tough kid. This is where he's going to carve out a role with the Steelers. Carson Bruener had a 5.83 grade, so he's there as an average backup or special teamer grade as well, like Donte Kent. So comes into the mix like pretty pro there. A big area where he was particularly strong is the number of tackles. He has 180 solo tackles in his college career, 125 assisted tackles. Both of these numbers are recorded in the Sports Reference. So that gives him 305 tackles, 12 tackles for a loss, 1.5 sacks, 5 interceptions, and 9 pass defenses. And it's interesting because 5 pass defenses is that's not too shabby for a linebacker in college football, right? And particularly a middle linebacker as well. It's not like he's been doing it on the edge. So I was pretty impressed with the 5 PBUs overall for him, because I think that shows that his capability in the coverage game as well, which is something that the Steelers need to make sure that their running backs can do both. So I kind of like it. I had them getting a thumper late if you go back to my top 75 videos, but I do like the idea of getting the coverage blokes. I do think that's a pretty cool situation overall. If we look at also some of his other stats, so his lineup, he was basically in the box for 495 snaps, almost 1,500 out of his 1,600 snaps. He actually lined up in the slot 90 times, which demonstrates the coverage, the quick ability. Now, obviously, they might have had injuries at Washington that led to that being the case, But it's still an interesting stat, I think, because it shows you that he can play there if pressed. Look, it's not like I'm going to sit here and say he's going to be in a dime package role. I don't think that's going to be the case, because the reality is that's going to be Peyton Wilson. But at the same time, you can't fault the boy. Like, he does give that versatility, and Peyton Wilson's not going to be fit every single game for the rest of his career. So there's also good that you've got someone that's got a bit of versatility here, even though he likely probably ends up on the practice squad. But the 5 PBUs is also that. Oh, sorry, PFF have him at 4 PBUs, but that puts him equal 6th last year amongst all those college running backs linebackers that are 50% of 944 snaps that were draft eligible in 2025. So pretty good from that regard. As I said, 3 interceptions in 2024 shows his capability, and that's 3 with PFF. He had 5 according to Sports Reference. I count Sports Reference versus PFF, so I'm pretty happy with that. Overall, PFF only have 1 sack. He's 1.5 because they round up or down on PFF. He's got 1.5 on Sports Reference. So overall, Carson Bruener, Donte Kent, welcome to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let me know in the comments, did you like these picks, or did you want someone else in the 7th round? Let me know in the comments. I'm keen to find out what these guys can do as we go through rookie minicamp, through training camp, into the preseason. But you shouldn't see which guys of these make the roster, which guys make the practice squad, and which guys find themselves on the outer. I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.